Come see us on tour. We're going to be in Baltimore, Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, New York, Cohoes, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.
Let's start off with Ukraine and go to our first segment. Here's the headline. In a stunning turn away from allies, the U.S. sides with Russia to vote against a UN resolution condemning Moscow's war against Ukraine. This is right. You are not seeing things. The U.S. has voted with Russia at the UN against a measure authored by Ukraine to condemn Russia's invasion, which, as we're recording this segment, has turned 3 years old today. The Trump administration declining to join Ukraine. What a sea change. And there's the rundown. The U.S. joined with Russia, China, and India abstained. And this is a remarkable change in U.S. policy, of course. For the last 3 years, it's been the U.S., but that's been leading the way in condemning Russia and refusing to negotiate with it. And now, under Trump, we are seeing a dramatic reversal to the point where the U.S. is voting alongside Russia against a Ukrainian-sponsored resolution condemning Russia's invasion. And then we had the U.S. and Russia again siding with each other to pass a measure at the UN Security Council calling for an end to the war, but without faulting Russia for the invasion. And this is a dramatic reversal of U.S. policy, and there is no one better to discuss it than our guest. John Mearsheimer is the R. Wendell Harrison Distinguished Service Professor at the University of Chicago, leading political scientist and international relations scholar. And more than a decade ago, he warned that the U.S. was leading Ukraine down the primrose path, and Ukraine would ultimately be wrecked. So let's bring in our guest, John Mearsheimer. Thanks for being here on the Jimmy Dore Show.
My pleasure, Aaron.
I first would love to get your response to this top line news. At the United Nations, the U.S. voting against a Ukrainian-authored resolution and voting alongside Russia.
It's stunning. I mean, I never thought that the Trump administration would so quickly do a 180-degree turn away from the Biden administration's policy toward Ukraine, which would end up putting us at odds not only with a huge chunk of the American foreign policy establishment, but also with Ukraine itself and with our European allies. But Trump has done that. He's clearly decided that he's going to settle this war in Ukraine, at least with regard to dealing with Russia. And he's going to accept, in all likelihood, all of the demands the Russians have made for achieving a peace settlement. This is truly remarkable. But this is where we are. And of course, the problem is, as I alluded to a minute ago, that the Europeans and the Ukrainians are adamantly opposed to what Trump is doing. And of course, all the usual suspects in the United States or in the West more generally are adamantly opposed to what he's doing. But the truth is, Trump just doesn't care. He's going to go ahead and work out a deal with the Russians. And we'll see what happens after that.
When you predicted it a decade ago that Ukraine was going to be in bad shape, I mean, could you have predicted that one day the U.S. and Russia would be voting together at the United Nations against a measure condemning Russia sponsored by Ukraine?
No, I thought, Aaron, that what would happen here is that we would get a frozen conflict, that eventually the Russians would win. Ukraine would be a dysfunctional rump state, which is another way of saying it would be wrecked, but there would not be a meaningful peace agreement. And I didn't think we'd live to see the day where an American president was out in front on shutting this war down and trying to achieve a genuine peace agreement. I mean, it's very important to emphasize that both the Russians and the Americans are not simply interested in stopping the fighting and creating some sort of ceasefire. They're interested in a genuine peace agreement. And the principle obstacle that the Americans face is getting the Ukrainians and the Europeans on board. But the Americans are fully in favor of working out an arrangement for a meaningful peace agreement, and I did not foresee that.
So, in terms of the areas where the U.S. would not need European and Ukrainian buy-in for a peace deal, where do you think Trump might be giving ground? I mean, Russia's proposal to the U.S. back in December 2021, which Biden basically refused to discuss, was a rollback of NATO, especially in the former Warsaw Pact states, a declaration that states like Ukraine will not join NATO. That seems to be already on the table from Trump. He's basically already promised that. And also, Russia's concerned about these so-called missile defense sites in Poland and Romania. I mean, do you see the U.S. giving ground there?
I'm not sure. I mean, most of what has been talked about, at least in open sources up to now, has to do with Ukraine. And there you have the issue of genuine neutrality for Ukraine. In other words, Ukraine not only will not be in NATO, there will not be meaningful security, meaningful security guarantees from the West to Ukraine. And then second, the United States and hopefully the West will accept the fact that Russia has annexed these 4 oblasts plus Crimea. And then I think finally the third most important dimension of a peace agreement involving Ukraine would be that Ukraine be demilitarized in a significant way. It could have some armaments, but it can't end up being a military threat to Russia. And I think, as best I can tell, that the Americans have agreed to those 3 demands. Now, then the question is, what about NATO forces that are located in Eastern Europe? And this, of course, gets to the missiles that are in Poland and Romania and assorted other forces as well, which have been moved eastward. And as you pointed out, Aaron, in the December 17th, 2021 letter that Putin wrote to Jens Stoltenberg and to Joe Biden, he insisted that that military equipment and those military forces be moved back to where they were before 1997. I don't think he was saying that the Baltic states could no longer be in NATO or Romania could no longer be in NATO. I think he was principally concerned in December of 2021 about the location of NATO forces in Eastern Europe. Now, very importantly, Putin has emphasized that he not only wants to settle the conflict with Ukraine, he wants to devise a security architecture for Europe, and certainly for Eastern Europe, that will guarantee peace or maximize the prospects that the peace will hold over the long term. And if that's the case, then I think they're going to have to reach an agreement on those NATO weapons that have been deployed eastward over time.
Hey, if you're watching this show, chances are you already know the mainstream media is full of crap. They're not here to inform you. They're here to spin stories, cater to corporate overlords, and protect the establishment at all costs. So just take a look at how they covered or didn't cover leaked photos linking Joe Biden to Hunter Biden's Chinese business partners. I ran this story through Ground News, who found nearly 100 sources reporting on it, and coverage is totally lopsided. Independent right-wing outlets are all over this, calling it what it is, proof Biden's been lying. Meanwhile, everyone else is just regurgitating CNN talking points, downplaying it like it's no big deal. Ground News even lets me see how many other publications have reposted the story from CNN. Let me ask you this. If the media is bending over backwards to protect Biden's image, even on his way out, how can we trust them to cover anything fairly? Well, the answer is you can't. The only way for us to cut through this media bias is to objectively compare how the same story is being reported across other media outlets. That's why I can't recommend my partners at Ground News enough. They're the only platform not telling you what to think. They show you every angle of every news story, whether it's from corporate media, independent outlets, or voices the establishment doesn't want you to hear. They expose who's funding each perspective and if they've got a political bias. They've even have a blind spot feed to expose what the other side of the political spectrum isn't reporting on, freeing readers of any hidden agendas and political spins. And if you want to cut through the BS of mainstream media, you can save 40% today off their top-tier Advantage plan by going to ground.news/JD or scanning my QR code. If you like the show, I think you'll love that platform. Come see us on tour. We're going to be in Baltimore, Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, New York, Cohoes, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.